वेलकम व्यूअर्स टू अ ब्रांड न्यू एपिसोड ऑफ इनसाइट। आज हम डिस्कस करने जा रहे हैं कि जो रिफॉर्म्स प्रपोज की गई हैं हाउस ऑफ लॉर्ड्स में वो कितनी बेहतर हैं और वो क्या लॉर्ड्स को रिफॉर्म कर सकेंगी। ये एक बहुत पुराना इंस्टीट्यूशन है और यूके का पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम उसके इर्द गिर्द घूमता है। उसको रिफॉर्म करने से क्या इम्पैक्ट आएगा। हमारे साथ इस वक्त स्टूडियोज़ में लॉर्ड शाइस्ता अहमद शियान मौजूद है। शी इज़ speaker on the international development for Lib Dem, and we have got Dr. Gautam Sen. He's a writer and an ex-professor at the London School of Economics. Welcome to the show. Dr. Jan, the first question Bernice Chan मेरा आपसे है कि हम रिफॉर्म करने जा रहे हैं, लेकिन द चैलेंजेस कि जो अनइलेक्टेड हाउस है वो अपनी जगह पे मेंटेन्ड है। और एज फार एज आई अंडरस्टैंड, लिब डेम हैड दिस ह्यूज sort of political kind of requirement that they wanted to create a house which is fully elected. तो क्या लिब डेम के members वो impact नहीं ला सके कमेटी में to have that as part of the kind of recommendation?
It won't impact on Liberal Democrats at all. Liberal Democrats, before you become a member, you know very clearly what your party's position is on the House of Lords, and it goes back a full decade, 1911, to when David Lloyd George wanted to bring in major changes to the way welfare was delivered, to introduce really the beginnings of the welfare state into the UK. And because the Liberal Party didn't have a majority in the House of Lords, and
which we don't have now also,
majority, it was voted down. And from that time, the Liberal Democrat position has always been that we want a fully elected chamber. We want democracy in both houses of Parliament.
Dr. Sen, I think when we look across Europe, France, Germany, any other country, उनका जो अपर हाउस है वो ऑलवेज इलेक्टेड होता है। इलेक्टोरल कॉलेज में भी उनका हाउस ऑफ कॉमन्स या उनकी लोकल असेंबली हो। बट व्हाई यूके हैज़ गॉट दिस सॉर्ट ऑफ अ वेरी पिकुलर सिचुएशन वेयर वी गेट पीपल अपॉइंटेड, और स्पेशली आई थिंक द इशू इज विद द कैश फॉर ऑनर स्कैंडल के बाद एक सिचुएशन है कि वो अपनी शाइन खो चुका है या क्रेडिबिलिटी पे थोड़ा सा इम्पैक्ट आया है। तो वो देखते हुए हमें इलेक्टेड हाउस की तरफ नहीं जाना चाहिए।
Well, the cash for honor scandal is not to do with the hereditary peerage.
No, but the members of the house are as the political parties appoint, and there are 800 of members there in the house, and everybody votes on different. So I think वो distinction मुश्किल हो जाएगा basically.
I would say that all these European countries which have fully elected second chambers have also experienced vast amounts of political violence over the centuries, which the UK has on the whole avoided. Now I fully take on board what Baroness has just said about the historic episode of Lloyd George's legislative program, a popular, legitimate legislative program being blocked by an unelected chamber. But that is no longer the case. And there is an argument that this residual 92 hereditary peers are part of a historical heritage which ought to be judged on performance rather than purely on the issue of whether or not they're elected. There is an argument in favor of that. And on the whole, I as a citizen would really only look to see what the House is doing in terms of its most important function, which I think it on the whole discharges well, which is the scrutiny of legislation emanating from the House of Commons. And I dare say the quality of the drafting is not quite what it used to be, perhaps simply because of the sheer volume and complexity of all that has come about in the modern world. And the second chamber with the requisite expertise. Now this is where if you have it purely elected, you will not get the kinds of people who have achieved a great deal in their lives and after retirement, or maybe even someone before, would be a valuable contributor to the upper chamber. Now these people would not necessarily be elected, and I think there is an argument about the morality of consequences of what is the ultimate outcome. Though of course I accept that that we are all determined to elect everything and everybody, but perhaps in a residual part of the heritage is not all bad.
No, I think I understand that. You mentioned in terms of the quality of drafting, which there's a huge pressure. House of Commons, primarily they are the people who would do that. But considering that, when we bring that to the House of Lords. And considering there is a sort of, I think a big tent with people from various different talents coming together. Do you think if वो इतना kind of focused है कि it can sort of look at that sort of very legislative, which is a very legalistic kind of language? So are they fit enough or trained enough to look at that basically?
I would say that really it has become unwieldy, and practical solutions of the kind Lord Burns and his committee have proposed are worth looking at. It is not a perfect solution, as he himself admits, because there are elements, for example, about the by-election of hereditary peers that they cannot address because it would require primary legislation. But I think really, in the larger scheme of things, this really is a storm in a teacup. We really have to look at the actual work that is being done, and there are scandals, as there are in so many areas of public life that we are finding out, and no doubt we will find some from the House too, in a short while once we're done with the House of Commons. But I think the reform is required simply because there are some practical problems which have arisen, and along with that they have proposed some further element of democracy. For example, the composition of the House of Lords should reflect the electoral mandate, and this issue of 1 in, 2 out, and parties volunteering the Lords to the slaughter will perhaps begin to remedy this. But I cannot see this will happen untroubled, because there would be protests.
I think it would take a long time for that 1 in, 2 out kind of formula to work through. Danishan, please go ahead.
I think as the only member of the House of Lords here, it behoves me really to speak out in defence of the chamber. I think the House of Lords, I've only been there 2 years, it has been really key in curbing some of the worst instincts of the government of the day. For example, on the day that I was introduced to the chamber, it was the House of Lords who really put their foot down when the government wanted to make changes to tax credits, so that some of the poorest people in the country were going to have to lose about £1,000 per annum on tax credit changes. And it was the House of Lords that really looked at the arguments, really weighed up the arguments, and said to the government, look, what you're proposing is, what you're actually going to be doing is not what you're thinking you're doing. You need to rethink this. And we voted down what the government was proposing, and it caused a huge uproar, really. We were told there was a constitutional crisis because this was a finance measure, and the House of Lords, by tradition, don't interfere with the will of the elected chamber in money matters. But this was not, the peers' argument, of course, which was very valid, was that this was by no means a money measure. It was brought in under a regulation, a statutory instrument of the Department and Works, the DWP department, not the Treasury.
I think, that's a good point, and you bring out a very valid example. But then there are kind of different point of views. One point of view is that there are 100 peers who have never even participated in a discussion.
No, I'm not defending
them. Do we need sort of those people to be still part of that? Should there not be certain performance measures to see whether they are contributing to the good work which you just mentioned? And I'm all for it, but I think that gives a little bit of negative perception to the
views. That's the Burns review, which the Liberal Democrats do support, addresses just that. It aims to cap the maximum number of peers at 600, and there will be natural, as you mentioned, there will be 2 out, 1 in, so there will be a gradual drawdown to 600, which won't take very long, actually. And through that process, yes, you can weed out the peers who really don't perform well.
You think this 15 years, say, licensing arrangement here, I would call it basically, to be a peer, you could be licensed for 15 years. Does that sort of, in a way, make it a bit of, a certain time period you have to do everything you want to do and, take full advantage of the privileges and stuff like that? Would it not make people rush through?
Well, whatever figure you pluck out, it's arbitrary in the end. And I presume the estimate is that you join the House in your 60s, mid-60s, and by the time you're 80, you're ready to retreat from public life for all sorts of reasons. Maybe you want to do that. But I would like to dissent a little bit from the Baroness on this question of the bill, which I agree with you, was not a finance bill. I agree technically this is correct. And I also agree with the outcome in the sense that this was a very unjust measure to impact on some of the most vulnerable people in society. But I do believe that even if it's bad policy, the House of Commons must prevail, because it is the one which has the mandate, and this, of course, does not say that they always pursue the right
absolutely,
policies.
and I take your point precisely, but do not forget that the House of Lords is only an amending and revising chamber. We cannot dictate our will to the House of Commons. This wasn't a huge overreaction on the part of the government to say this was a constitutional crisis, because we only amended it, and we only have a limited period when that amendment will stand.
No, this, of course, is the saving grace in the sense that it is really a power to delay ultimately, and that I think is reasonable. I think
indeed it is the power to say to the House of Commons, please rethink this.
Yes.
We think you've got it wrong. That was all.
An important part of any democracy.
And in fact, they did rethink it, and they withdrew the measure.
But I'll give you an example where this is not so satisfactory, because I'm familiar with this one piece of legislation, the amendment for the caste bill from 2013.
Yeah, that has attracted a lot of...
And that the government has made very clear they would wish not to legislate, and they would like to pass additional legislation to take it out of the jurisdiction of the courts. But they have also said to us in our meetings that the House of Lords will amend primary legislation, so we can't do it.
Yeah.
And that is something which is going to happen because the House of Lords has the ability to amend primary legislation.
I think that's why the House of Lords... Sorry.
We can amend primary legislation, but only if during ping-pong the government at some point accepts our recommendation. There's nothing that forces the government to accept our recommendation in the long term.
I'll ask my viewers, if you have got any questions, please do call, and we are here to sort of provide you a complete understanding of how we can reform the House of Lords. Do you agree that when we say reform the House of Lords, is there something really rotten there? Why is this sort of, the agenda is being pushed forward?
Not at all. I mean, I've been in the House of Lords for 2 years, and I have been so impressed with the integrity of the people that I work with. I sit on the Select Committee, the Lords EU Select Committee on Energy and Environment. The work that we do there in scrutinising the legislation historically that's coming over from the EU that impacts on energy environment policy areas in the UK. We look to see what the impact of that is going to be. That is a little bit defunct, if you like, at the moment, but there is a fantastic body of work that the Lords have been doing, which no other department in government really has the
capacity to do,
resources to do, and that is to look at the impact of Brexit on various policy areas. So we have produced inquiry reports on the impact of Brexit on the environment, the impact of Brexit on agriculture, the impact of Brexit on fisheries, and we're in the process of doing a report on the impact of Brexit on energy security. That's just my committee. I think in total we've produced about 60 reports.
Dr. Sen, sorry, you can say.
So this really underlines the importance of the function of the House of Lords.
Indeed,
that is in the detail and the regular disciplined work which has to be done, and indeed it is done by people who have unusual skills and life experiences. And
so they bring that humanity to the legislative process.
I think it is also to do with the magnitude of the intellectual skills which have to be deployed.
Yes, if I can just say, when the life peerages were first introduced, they were introduced to bring in the law lords into the chamber because it was recognised that they had a particular expertise that was lacking in the chamber. So the first life peerages created 4 judges.
People from the legal background. They were brought in.
Legal background. And that has really been the guiding philosophy of appointing people to the House of Lords through life peerages, and that is to give a broader depth of expertise around the House, so that there's always somebody in the House.
No, other issue I've come across basically, and we had a research team has been approached by many other sort of parties to ask the question. In every walk of life, we do have a retirement age. Somewhere down the line, we think we had enough of this, and we're going to. But House of Lords exists without a particular retirement age. Save this 15 years of sort of, that also does not, if somebody joins it and at a later age would still be a little bit sort of, octogenarian basically.
It's not 15 years yet.
So it's not 15 years. It's even one of the recommendations basically in the Burns Commission. But do you think it should have a retirement age or maximum age people could be part of the House of Lords?
The 2014 House of Lords reform allows you to keep the title even after you withdraw. So this is a compromise, and I do believe a retirement age will be required, if only because this may be the only way to address the problem of the House becoming unwieldy and the desire to reduce the size from 800 to 600. But I had a slightly different point to make, which is to do with the...
Before you go on to a different point, I don't agree with ageism. I think if you are able to contribute and willing to contribute and have the energy still, I think you really ought to be. I don't think age should be a factor.
I think that's a perfectly legitimate argument, because I know many people who are much, much older than me who are much more robust and more stamina.
I'll bring one.
That is certainly a...
No, I'll bring one here. Basically, John Bercow, the Speaker of the House of Commons, have given a very sort of, provocative statement, basically saying, the House is totally unmanageable, or House of Commons की जो sort of वो है quantity है, वो कम होनी चाहिए. So what do you think?
House of Commons.
Yeah, it should be in line with that, like say.
Yes.
So what do you think? Because he also sort of is one of the persons who just उन्होंने हमेशा House of Lords को challenge किया basically in terms of how they operate and the system around House of Lords formation.
I would say ultimately it must depend partly on the workload, and an individual MP will have certain limitations of the size of the constituency and their issues that he or she can deal with. So I think there's got to be a calculation, and on my sense of the MPs that I have worked with is that they have a pretty busy life, and at the moment the numbers are 650, and I think one should judge whether or not.
And of course, don't forget the boundary reviews due to report back,
that
and
will
that's
also
going
alter
to...
many things.
So is it like हम chase कर रहे हैं एक ऐसी चीज को जो अभी तक definite नहीं है? If the Boundary Commission comes into play, it reduces the size of the House of Commons by 50 seats. Do you think then there is a bit of for House of Lords to chase that number, like proportionality in terms?
Well, the Burns Review does do that. It sort of preempts that and says the House of Lords should be no more than the House of Commons, and given that the boundary the Boundary Commission is looking to reduce that number to 600. They have said 600. I think what the Burns Commission, Burns Review is really trying to do is to make sure that they can actually get this review accepted by all the parties, because the history of reform of the House of Lords is a graveyard of
a lot of different committee reports.
Going back over centuries,
I think what I'll bring here is basically, we have got a House of Lords which is unelected. There are other countries which have elected, I mentioned earlier, but even direct election, like if you take the example of US, the Senate is directly elected. If you take example of Japan, they've got a very similar system. Do they have got it wrong?
I think in principle there is always a danger that two elected chambers are unable to concur, and this may make a society ungovernable. We always end up with a somewhat imperfect system which also retains a degree of executive ability to proceed. So this is a question to ponder, and I don't think that nominating distinguished people is necessarily a bad thing. I'm even prepared to swallow numbers of hereditary peers, provided they do not nominate and do not attempt to do what they did with Lloyd George. But there is one group of people who have unusual privileges which sits uncomfortably with the way British society is constituted, and that is the bishops.
Yes, I understand.
It is a bit odd that other communities do not have their religious
representatives there.
And this may have a huge positive benefit, because this will be an alternative pole of leadership which may well turn out to be much more cognizant of the public good than people in private in their mosques and temples. So this group should be in the House. Perhaps fewer bishops,
or rather more representative of the religious community. Viewers, you can call us. The lines are open if there are any questions. I ask the same question because I would. The reason to ask that question is that Lib Dem has always asked for a fully elected chamber.
Yes.
Upper chamber. Now, do you think the examples from US, Japan and other countries could not lead us that way? क्या वजह है? क्या उनका system गलत है? What do you say?
No, I don't think the system's wrong. I think the Liberal Democrat position of wanting a democratically elected second chamber, and you're quite right. There is this issue then of two elected chambers, which has supremacy. At the moment, it's very clear, and the House of Lords accept that it is the elected chamber, the elected House of Commons, that has supremacy, and we will always defer to the elected chamber in the end. What the Liberal Democrats have proposed is that there is a different system of election. The Commons is elected by first past the post, and that the House of Lords should be elected on a more proportional representational basis.
Makes sense if we are able to adopt that. I think that system, it does have a lot of merits, but somehow or the other, I think we are going against the tide here. Nobody would be in a situation where they'll agree, the rest of the parties, because you just have 100 members. We're talking about Conservative and Labour, 200 plus and numbers.
He's going to tell some of the floor in my
I think this is going to be an extraordinary situation where the people elected by first past the post will be competing with those who have been elected with much larger majorities to contest their views.
You're right, and this is the reason. This is the reason why the House of Commons has always voted down House of Lords reform of an
electoral system. Yes, electoral reforms.
Because this will open up a can of worms.
Yes. Now tell me, how much is the party patronage is playing the whole game of who I want to send into the House of Lords?
Indeed.
There is a huge sort of, and we say that they are independent, and I agree with that to a certain extent. But probably what we have seen, the intake of probably 2007 onwards, there has been a bit of party patronage working through. So does it take away the shine of the House of Lords as an independent, straight to the core chamber?
I personally, no, I don't think it does at all, because I think the calibre of the people, you really have to judge by the work that they're doing.
I can count you a few people which we have to turn in the end sort of deselect them, or rather how de-seat them from the House of Lords.
There's always been controversy around some of the appointees. Going back, I can tell you, to the days of Magna Carta, when...
I have to be a little bit controversial, though I will not defame.
You're on ZTV, you could be.
I would tell you that I've been here for a very long time, almost 50 years, and I've been observing British politics as an academic and as somebody who's active in politics, campaign for my local MP and all that kind of stuff. And I know a lot of people in politics. I'm engaged across the country, the Midlands, Leicester, and the people of Indian origin have no confidence in virtually any of the Indian origin peers, and I mean virtually every single, they have no confidence. So there is a problem that needs to be addressed, and there is a suspicion, perhaps not entirely correct, I think it cannot be correct, that many of these berths have been purchased.
Okay.
There is, I think there was
I don't know which party you campaigned for.
But let me clear that there was a police officer who knocked at the door of Tony Blair, inquiring about this. So I think this thing has got a bit of quite deep-seated sort of lack of what you say credibility within the appointment system. I'm not saying people within the House of Lords. I think they are all people who have got very good reputation. But I think that the appointment system kind of makes it a little bit difficult.
I mean. How many peers are in the House of Lords because they have donated to party funds? Not many on the Lib Dem benches, I have to say. I mean, I'm not a major donor to my party by any means, and I served within the party ranks quite diligently, and I was very surprised when Nick Clegg phoned me up actually to say, would you like a seat in the House of Lords? And it wasn't what I was expecting, but I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and I think I am really contributing hugely to the work. I am my party's front bench spokesperson for international development,
and we understand you were very busy basically for the last few weeks. One question, Dr. Sen, I wanted to sort of bring to the table is that, do you think that the Burns Commission recommendation, without any legislative cover from the legislative authority is House of Commons, would it still go through would be implemented? What do you think?
This is a question actually you should rightly put to the Baroness, because I don't know how her colleagues are thinking. I assume it is not going to be easy. I just want to add one point.
Please.
I do not believe, despite what I've just said earlier about cash for honours, that the majority of people are appointed this way. I do believe the majority of people are there on their legitimate claims, as the Baroness here herself surely has been.
It's very,
so I think this is, but you know, it leaves a bad taste in the mouth, even if it's in a minority of cases.
It's very difficult for me to talk about colleagues, you know, without.
I don't know, but I think even as an outsider, I do not think this is common, but it surely happens, and this is not good for the reputation. But ultimately, we think the responsibility lies with the House of Commons for all of these things, and the 1.3 billion pounds, I believe, the House of Commons, the House of Lords members cost, I think, is really loose change and rather exaggerated for the work they do.
No, I think in bigger scheme of things,
quality of Parliament, parliamentary work, and parliamentary democracy that we have in the UK. You're right; it is loose change, and we have to pay for decent democracy, good governance. It doesn't come cheap,
and especially in a country which there is no written constitution.
Indeed.
I think that's what sort of, you know, there is a sort of, you know, inherent mechanism of check and balances, and that's where sort of, you know, I think House of Lords comes into play, where they are able to reform the legislation put forward to them and how it can impact people and bring it back. So that ping pong happens, but I think that happens for a reason.
It also is underpinned by a very important principle of political philosophy, that the constitution usually is something imposed from above, whereas a political culture without a constitution means individuals at the lower end, at the bottom, must comply and must voluntarily agree with this arrangement. And that's a very powerful source of social stability in any society, that the ordinary people, without a written constitution, come together and agree that this is how we shall function in amity.
They come in a club-like environment.
And that's very powerful for a society's well-being.
Baroness Chan, one question I had, and a lot of our viewers would really love to have an answer to that. How somebody becomes a member of House of Lords? or a Baroness? Yeah, give us the trick.
I can tell you how I came to be appointed. I wasn't involved in politics in any shape or form until my mid-40s, actually, and then I was very, very angry about Britain going into war in Iraq, which I thought was illegal, and the whole premise of the war was illegal. It made me very cross. My academic background is environmental technology. I really care about the environment, and I was very, very cross that by the time I was in my mid-40s, I could see that the science was proven, everything was in place. It was just the political will that was lacking. So those two things made me pick up the phone to my local parties and say, you know, is there any way I can help? Liberal Democrats were on my doorstep within 5 minutes saying, can you deliver these leaflets for us? And that's how I got involved. My children were still quite young at that point, so I just gave spare time when they were at school to the Liberal Democrats, got more and more involved, and was asked to join Susan Kramer, who's MP in Richmond Park, her staff. I was then asked to stand for the local council as a councillor, and I was elected to the local council in Kew, where I lived, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I would say to any of your viewers who are out there, it is about public service. It's about looking at your community and saying, what can I do to help? And if you have the opportunity to become a local councillor, then take it, you know?
So it has to start. You could see the Baroness Chan here, basically, but she started as joining the party.
Volunteer.
That's the first step you have to take. Be part of the fabric of politics where you live. Last few minutes we have, basically, in fact, 30 seconds. What do you think, Dr. Sen, would happen 3 years down the line? Do you think, we would have 15 years, we would have a reformed House of Lords? Or which reform do you think would be applicable?
There's one huge uncertainty about the outcome of the Brexit negotiations, and that in a way will have uncertain and unknown consequences which will affect all of this, and it may even relegate this simply because more vital issues come to the fore. And nevertheless, I have confidence, I've been observing it for a long time, that people will pull together and somehow it will carry on.
Dr. Krishan, sorry, Berenjan, your last words will be just sort of last 3 seconds.
My last 3 seconds. Lord Fowler, who is the Speaker of the House of Lords, has been very sensible. He has tried to put together a package that he thinks can be implemented by the new year.
So viewers, I hope you have got a good understanding of what are the reforms or कैसे House of Lords operate करता है. You have any further questions, please do not hesitate to write to us, and thank you for joining us today at Insight, and I hope you got some kind of an understanding of the topic. Thank you very much.